Imagine stepping off the plane in Singapore for the very first time. You look around, tropical heat, skyscrapers rising like glass mountains, hawker stalls sizzling with spices from every corner of Asia. You expect to hear Chinese, Malay, or maybe Tamil. But then, surprise, the taxi driver greets you in English. The waiter takes your order in English. The kids running past you at Orchard Road chatter in English. And suddenly you ask the question almost every visitor asks. Why does Singapore, a small Asian country surrounded by Malaysia and Indonesia, speak English as its main language? This is not an accident. This is not random. It is the story of survival, of strategy, of turning language into a weapon of success. Today we're going to uncover how Singapore transformed English, once a colonial language of outsiders, into its secret superpower. And by the end, you'll see why this choice made Singapore one of the richest, safest, and most connected countries in the world. Chapter 1: A City of Many Tongues. Singapore was never destined to have one single language. From the very beginning, it was a crossroads of cultures, and with that came a storm of voices. When the British established Singapore as a trading port in 1819, the island exploded with diversity almost overnight. Chinese traders sailed in from Fujian and Guangdong, bringing dialects like Hokkien, Cantonese, Teochew, and Hakka. Indian workers and merchants followed, speaking Tamil, Hindi, Punjabi, and Gujarati. The Malays, the indigenous people of the region, spoke Malay, the lingua franca of the Malay archipelago. And of course, the British administrators and soldiers brought English. Imagine walking through the bustling markets of 19th century Singapore. Hawkers shouted prices in Hokkien. Fishermen bargained in Malay. Clerks scribbled in English. Temples echoed in Tamil chants. It was beautiful chaos, a Tower of Babel on a tiny island. But this diversity also created a problem. How do you run a port city when no one fully understands each other? How do you collect taxes, set laws, or negotiate contracts when every group speaks a different tongue? The solution came not from love, but from necessity, a bridge language. And English, the language of colonial rule, quietly slipped into that role. It was practical, neutral, and essential for trade. While no community claimed it as their heritage, every community realized they needed it. By the mid-20th century, Singapore was a patchwork of dialects with no unifying voice. Hundreds of tongues filled the streets, but there was no single thread to tie them together. When independence arrived in 1965, the young nation faced a daunting question. Which language would carry Singapore forward? And that is where English became more than just convenient. It became the key to survival. Chapter 2: Lee Kuan Yew's Big Decision. When Singapore became independent in 1965, the nation was hanging by a thread. It had no natural resources, no army to defend itself, and no guarantee of survival. It had just been expelled from Malaysia, leaving it alone in a region where larger neighbors often looked down on the tiny island. Inside, the situation was even more fragile. The people were divided by race, religion, and language. Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore's first prime minister, knew that if he couldn't unite the population, the country might collapse before it even began. And he also knew that unity couldn't just be political or economic, it had to be linguistic. A common language would be the glue holding the country together. But which one? At first glance, Malay seemed like the obvious choice. It was the traditional language of the region, and it tied Singapore to its Malay neighbors. But only a portion of Singaporeans spoke it fluently, and favoring Malay risked alienating the Chinese and Indian communities. What about Chinese? The Chinese made up nearly 3/4 of the population, but even within that group, there was no single Chinese language. The older generation spoke Hokkien, Cantonese, Teochew, and Hakka. Promoting Mandarin, which Beijing was pushing as a unifying Chinese language, would leave many Singaporeans behind and stir suspicion among Malays and Indians who might fear Chinese dominance. Tamil, meanwhile, was important to the Indian community, but it represented only a minority. Every option carried the risk of division. Choosing one local language meant choosing one ethnic group, and that was dangerous. So Lee made a radical choice. He chose English. English, ironically, was the language of Singapore's former colonial rulers. It wasn't the mother tongue of any community, which made it politically neutral. No one could claim it as theirs. That neutrality was its strength. It could be the common ground for all races. But neutrality wasn't the only reason. Lee was also thinking about the future. In the 1960s, the world was being reshaped by globalization. The United States, Britain, and other English-speaking powers dominated trade, science, technology, and diplomacy. English was the passport to global business, higher education, and international relations. By choosing English, Lee was doing two things at once. One, healing divisions at home by giving every community a shared voice. Two, opening doors abroad by equipping Singaporeans to compete on the world stage. It was a decision of survival and ambition. Of course, it wasn't popular at first. Older generations struggled. Many saw English as foreign, even alien. But Lee doubled down. He insisted on English medium schools, English language administration, and English as the working language of government. Over time, English stopped being the colonial language and became the Singaporean language. This bold gamble shaped Singapore's destiny. Instead of fracturing into rival communities, the nation built a shared identity. And instead of staying a small trading post, Singapore became a global hub, where English was not just a tool of communication, but the foundation of success. Chapter 3, English in the Classroom. If a nation's future lives in its children, then language is the seed planted in every classroom. Lee Kuan Yew and his government understood this clearly. If Singapore was to survive as a new nation, it couldn't just declare English as the official working language. It had to grow English into the daily lives of its citizens, starting with the young. So in 1966, barely a year after independence, the government launched a radical shift in education. All schools would adopt English as the main medium of instruction. This was revolutionary. Imagine it. Children who spoke Hokkien or Cantonese at home suddenly had to study math in English, write science essays in English, and read history textbooks in English. Overnight, English was no longer a foreign tongue of colonial administrators. It was the key to passing exams, getting scholarships, and securing jobs. Yet here's the clever twist. Singapore didn't erase the past. To avoid losing cultural identity, the government introduced a mother tongue policy. Every student had to study two languages, English plus their ethnic language. Chinese students learned Mandarin, Malay students learned Malay, Indian students learned Tamil, or in some cases, other South Asian languages. This dual language system was brilliant. English became the common ground for unity and opportunity, while the mother tongues preserved roots, traditions, and values. It was a balancing act, modernization without cultural erasure. At first, it wasn't easy. Older parents, especially those with little or no English, struggled to help their children. Many feared their kids would lose their culture. But over time, results spoke louder than fears. Students who excelled in English could land jobs in banks, factories, and government offices. They could read global science journals, sign international business contracts, and communicate with people from every background. By the 1970s and 1980s, a pattern was clear. Families who embraced English saw their children rise faster in society. A clerk who spoke only Hokkien or Malay might remain stuck in lower-paying jobs. But a young graduate fluent in English could climb the corporate ladder, work with multinational companies, or even study abroad. Parents noticed. Suddenly, English wasn't just a government mandate, it became a survival tool. Every parent wanted it. Every child needed it. Tuition centers sprang up. Families practiced English at home, even if imperfectly. Within a generation, Singaporeans shifted from struggling with English to mastering it with confidence. By the 1980s, English was no longer viewed as a colonial leftover. It was the language of science, law, business, and government. More importantly, it was the language of the future, a future where Singapore was no longer a struggling island, but a rising global hub. This education revolution was the heartbeat of Singapore's transformation. In classrooms filled with chalkboards, textbooks, and children in white uniforms, a new nation was quietly being written, sentence by sentence in English. Chapter 4, The Secret Superpower. Here's the truth. English didn't just make Singapore bilingual, it made Singapore powerful. In the 1970s, Singapore was still a young nation, trying to prove itself. Around the world, multinational companies were searching for a base in Asia. They needed somewhere safe, stable, and connected, a place to set up factories, banks, and shipping hubs. Why did so many of them choose Singapore? Because in Singapore, they could hire workers who spoke English. Factories could train technicians using manuals written in English. Banks could draft legal contracts in English, recognized around the world. Doctors and engineers could study advanced materials, textbooks, and journals without translation delays. And perhaps most importantly, Singapore's students could attend universities in America, Britain, and Australia, then return home armed with world-class knowledge. They came back as doctors, lawyers, scientists, and entrepreneurs, ready to build the island into a modern powerhouse. Language turned out to be more valuable than oil or gold. It made Singapore the link between East and West. Chinese businesses trusted Singapore because its contracts were clear. Indian businesses trusted Singapore because its professionals were globally trained. Western companies trusted Singapore because communication was seamless. English was the common denominator, the invisible glue holding these relationships together. By the 1980s, this advantage became obvious. Shipping companies chose Singapore's ports. Airlines made Changi Airport their hub. Global banks filled skyscrapers in the central business district. For every deal signed in Singapore, there was one secret weapon at work: English. And this wasn't just about business. Diplomacy, too, benefited. Singapore could host international summits where leaders from China, India, the US, and Europe all sat at one table and spoke one tongue. English made Singapore a natural mediator, a bridge across cultures. Today, when you walk through Raffles Place or Marina Bay, you'll hear the hum of global commerce. Bankers from New York, engineers from Shanghai, lawyers from London, and tech entrepreneurs from Mumbai, all communicating in the same language. English turns Singapore's skyline into more than just steel and glass. It turns it into a living, breathing marketplace of ideas. This wasn't luck, it was strategy. Lee Kuan Yew and his team understood something profound. In a world where nations compete fiercely, language could be the ultimate advantage. Singapore had no natural resources, but it had English, and with it, it built a superpower not of size, but of influence. The choice of English didn't just unite a divided society. It positioned Singapore as a global connector, a place where East meets West, and where opportunities flow through a shared voice. That is why, even today, Singapore punches far above its weight. Because while other countries argue about language, Singapore turned it into its greatest strength, its secret superpower. Chapter 5, Singlish, the people's English. But here's the fun twist. Singapore didn't just adopt English, it remixed it. It made something new, something alive, something uniquely Singaporean. Singlish. Singlish is English, but not quite. It's English sprinkled with Chinese dialects, Malay expressions, and Tamil influences. It's fast, it's colorful, it's witty, and for many Singaporeans, it feels more natural than textbook English. Take a simple phrase, can or not. It sounds broken to the outsiders, but in Singapore, it's perfectly clear. Is it possible? Or the famous particles, tiny words like la, lor, lay, meh. They don't translate directly, but they add emotion, rhythm, and personality. Don't worry, la softens the tone, like a friendly pat on the back. Okay, lor shows reluctant agreement. Really, meh? Expresses doubt. These little words transform ordinary sentences into something uniquely Singaporean. To a foreigner, Singlish might sound messy, but to Singaporeans, it's music. It reflects their identity, a blend of Chinese, Malay, Indian, and Western cultures, all compressed into one sentence. At first, the government wasn't happy about it. Campaigns like the Speak Good English movement were launched to push standard English, especially for business and international dealings. Leaders worried that Singlish would make Singaporeans sound uneducated and hold them back in the global arena. But despite those efforts, Singlish refused to die. Why? Because it wasn't just a way of speaking, it was a way of belonging. When Singaporeans joke in Singlish, they instantly know who's inside the culture. It builds solidarity, humor, and warmth that polished English sometimes cannot capture. Today, Singapore exists in two layers of English. Formal English, for schools, jobs, business meetings, and the global stage. Singlish, for hawker stalls, family dinners, WhatsApp chats, and taxi rides. Together, they tell a bigger story. English may have started as a colonial import, but through Singlish, Singapore transformed it into something proudly its own. Proof that even a foreign tongue can become a national identity when people make it theirs. Singlish isn't just broken English, it's Singapore's heartbeat. Lively, mixed, and unmistakably unique. Chapter 6. The Global Advantage. Fast forward to today. Singapore is a dot on the map. It has no oil fields, no vast farmlands, no gold mines. By the laws of geography, it should be struggling. And yet, this tiny island ranks among the richest and most advanced countries on Earth. How? Because Singapore sells something far more valuable than natural resources: connection. And the engine of that connection is English. Walk into the central business district and you'll see the world packed into one skyline. American banks, German insurance companies, Japanese trading firms, Indian tech giants, all headquartered side by side. Why? Because in Singapore, they can communicate in one global language. Contracts are written in English. Business meetings flow in English. Negotiations happen without confusion. This advantage extends to every corner of the country. Airports. Changi Airport is consistently ranked the best in the world, serving as Asia's main gateway. Pilots, crew, and passengers from every continent rely on English to coordinate smoothly. Universities. Singapore's universities, like NUS and NTU, rank among the world's best because they teach and publish in English. Students from China, India, Europe, and Africa come to study here, knowing they'll graduate ready for the global market. Technology. From biomedical research to artificial intelligence, English gives Singaporean scientists direct access to the latest discoveries without waiting for translation. For ordinary Singaporeans, this is just as powerful. English makes them employable almost anywhere. A Singaporean engineer can work in New York. A lawyer can draft contracts in London. A startup founder can pitch to investors in Silicon Valley, all without a language barrier. Tourists love it too. Whether from France, China, or Brazil, they know they can ask for directions in English and be understood. Investors love it because the rule of law, written and enforced in English, makes their money safe. Diplomats love it because negotiations are smooth and neutral. In a world where language can be a wall, Singapore turned it into a bridge. And that bridge extends beyond economics. It shapes identity. Singaporeans may speak different mother tongues at home, but English unites them in classrooms, offices, and on the world stage. It's the thread that binds diversity into strength. Think about this. If Singapore had chosen only Mandarin, it might have alienated Malays and Indians. If it had chosen Malay, it might have limited its global reach. But by choosing English, it got the best of both worlds: unity at home and opportunity abroad. Today, Singapore is proof that language is not just communication, it is infrastructure. As vital as ports, highways, or electricity, it is the silent superpower that makes a small island punch far above its weight. Other nations mine oil or harvest crops. Singapore mines trust, clarity, and connection, all powered by English. And that is the global advantage. Conclusion: the language that built a nation. So why does Singapore speak English? Because it had no choice, and because it made the smartest choice. In 1965, Singapore stood on the edge of survival. Divided by dialects, fractured by race, and surrounded by larger, stronger neighbors, the country could have easily fallen apart. But instead of letting language divide, it used language to unite. English became the common voice that every Singaporean could share. It was neutral, it was practical, it was the bridge across communities that had little in common. And in the process, English did more than unite. It propelled. It plugged Singapore into the world economy. It turned students into scholars, workers into professionals, and a fragile island into a trusted hub for business, finance, and diplomacy. English became Singapore's passport to the future. And yet, Singapore never erased its roots. Mandarin, Malay, and Tamil stayed alive through schools, families, and festivals. Hawker centers still hum with dialects. Temples, mosques, and churches still echo in ancestral tongues. And then there is Singlish, the playful, cheeky remix of English that belongs to no one else but Singaporeans. That is the beauty of this story. English here is not a mark of colonial domination. It's a story of transformation. A language once foreign was reshaped, redefined, and reborn into something uniquely Singaporean. So the next time you land at Changi Airport and hear English everywhere, from the immigration counter to the MRT to the bustling food stalls, remember this: you're not just hearing convenience, you're hearing the sound of a nation that built itself from nothing. 200 years ago, Singapore was just a muddy trading post. Today, it is a global city, trusted, admired, and envied. And the voice of that miracle, the heartbeat of its survival, speaks English.